Welcome to the 7 Deadly Asylum Interview Sins training. I'm so glad to have you with me. This is important. Now, when I was an immigration officer with the government, I saw a lot of the same mistakes over and over again. And at the asylum office, I came to notice that there were certain things that people just kept doing that hurt their cases, okay, that made them less competitive, and I think really make it less likely that they'll get asylum. And so I put together a list of 7 really common things that can trip you up during your actual interview. And I want to tell you about them so that you'll be prepared and so you can avoid these things. Okay, so we're going to work through this list, and it's phrased in the negative of things that you want to avoid. But as we go through this, you'll see that I'm also going to be telling you what to do, not just what not to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So, number one has to do with control. You have to recognize that you're not in control, and this is really hard to do. You're doing something that's really important, right? You're explaining your history, you're explaining your story, and why you deserve asylum, why you're afraid to go back to your country, and why you should qualify for asylum under the laws and policies of the United States. It's really important, so it's completely natural that you would want to control that and that you would want to have things go during the interview the way that you want them to go so that you can explain yourself. Unfortunately, you have to get over that. You can't do it, okay? The asylum officer is not going to just let you talk and tell your story. They're going to constantly interrupt you. They're going to ask you questions and expect you to answer that question, okay? You are not in control of the asylum interview, and you just have to accept that, because if you try to take control and you try to steer the conversation only to where you want it to go, or if you try to just sort of dictate the terms of what's going on during that interview, you're going to have problems. That's the quickest way to make the asylum officer not like you and therefore not like your case. If you come in there with a very stubborn will and try to control things and try to dominate the interview, you've just got to go with the flow, okay? You have to let the interview come to you, and you have to go where the officer takes you. There are definitely methods for ensuring that you get across the information that you want to get across so the officer understands why you should get asylum. And we're going to discuss some of those in this training. And of course, I talk about in detail about those things in other trainings. But as a general principle, please understand that you just kind of have to go with the flow at the interview and just go with it wherever it takes you, okay? And understand that, speaking of control, you don't have any control over who the asylum officer is that interviews you. And this can make a big difference, because some officers are great to be interviewed by. Some of them are very sympathetic and very understanding and very patient. And some of them are more or less rooting for you. It's no real secret that there are some officers who are much more pro-immigrant and much more likely to grant asylum and to even want to grant asylum than other officers, some of whom are just straight up anti-immigrant and really don't want to give asylum to hardly anyone. You can't choose that, unfortunately, and you have to just be ready for that the officer might be a little bit tough on you. They might come across as gruff or as just not really inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt or to work with you in a patient, sympathetic way. You have to be ready for that, okay? Go into it knowing that, you know what, you may have a tough officer. And take heart, though, because even if you do have someone that seems like they're really tough and they really seem kind of like they're being hard on you and maybe like they don't believe you or that they're just not really acting like they think that you have a good case, you could still get asylum, okay? Some officers like to put up kind of a tough front and be very matter of fact and businesslike and even a little bit short with applicants sometimes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get asylum. So understand that, you can't choose your officer. You just got to go with what you're given, but even if it seems like not the best fit, you may still get asylum, okay? So number 2 in the list of 7 deadly asylum interview sins, after trying to dominate and take control of the interview has to do with your appearance, okay? Presentation matters. And when I was an asylum officer, there were cases where I saw people dressed in a certain way that just rubbed me the wrong way and just gave a bad impression. Now, of course, what you happen to be wearing the day of your asylum interview shouldn't impact the decision in your asylum case, right? That has nothing to do with whether you have been persecuted or whether there's a reasonable possibility that you'll be persecuted in the future on account of a protected characteristic that you possess. Those things and what you wear to your interview have no relation to each other, right? But asylum officers are human, okay? And they are influenced by all the same things that other people are influenced by. And your presentation and the impression that you make on them matters. And part of that impression is your appearance and your clothing, okay? I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I've seen people present like this, and it's not a good idea. So starting on the left, you see this guy who's just dressed very sloppily, and he's dirty, right? He's got dirt on his clothes. Don't do that. In the middle, you've got a woman who is dressed in a way that's not very modest. She's exposing a lot of skin. That's not a good idea either. I think there are some people who feel like maybe that's a good idea to impress the officer or something like that. But I promise you, it's not a good idea. This is not the place for that. And on the right, you've got this guy who's just dressed very casually. It's not necessarily sloppy or dirty, but it's just very casual, like he's, hanging out with friends in the backyard or whatever. None of these is a very good idea, okay? You want to go with something that's a little bit more classy. These are some examples of what I think is appropriate dress for an asylum interview. So on the left, this woman has a jacket on over a sweater, and which is a good look. It's not super formal, but it looks sharp. And in the middle, the guy has his shirt untucked, so that's a little bit informal, but it's okay. It's a button-up shirt, which I think is a good idea, and khaki pants, which works well for a man. And then on the right, the guy's a little bit more formal in the sense that he has kind of dress or suit pants on that look a little more formal, and his shirt's tucked in. That's a very good look on the right. That's probably my preferred look for how you should dress in an asylum interview. And here's a note: bring a jacket with you, okay? Sometimes it's cold at the asylum office. Where I worked at the Houston asylum office, they could not control the temperature very well in the offices. So sometimes it was super hot, sometimes it was super cold in that building. So you want to be prepared with a jacket that you can put on if you're cold, so that you're not shivering and distracted by how cold it is. You don't want to be thinking about things like that when you're trying to articulate why it is that you fear being harmed in your country. Okay, so there's a couple of other dress options or styles that I sometimes saw in the asylum office, and these are either people wearing some kind of traditional dress like you see from the guy on the left, or something more formal like the person in the middle and the person on the right. And these are okay. These are fine. If you feel comfortable wearing this kind of outfit, which is to say something quite formal or something that's like part of your traditional cultural dress, if it feels good to you and you feel comfortable and confident in it, then do that. But know that you don't necessarily need to go that formal. Suit and tie it's not really, I wouldn't say it's necessary, or like a nice dress like the woman in the middle has on. You can be a little bit more casual along the lines of what I showed you earlier. But generally speaking, you do just kind of want to be well kempt. You want to be clean and bathed and have your hair combed and looking presentable, because again, asylum officers are human and they're influenced by these first impressions, as we all are. So don't think that presentation doesn't matter. And I saw it a lot. I saw people that showed up and you just thought, you know what? This person doesn't seem to be taking this process very seriously. They're not showing respect for the officer or for this process in the way that they're dressed. You want to communicate that you take it seriously enough to be, dressed in a way that shows that you care by putting on some decent, clean clothes and that you are clean and presentable. It's basically a matter of respect, and it does matter. Okay? Number 3 on our list of 7 deadly asylum interview sins is guessing. And by that, I'm talking about the way that you answer questions. Sometimes people will just blurt out things when they don't know the answer. They'll kind of make something up, or maybe they're not that sure to the answer to a question, and so they will just sort of say, I think it's this, but they won't say the words I think. They'll just present an answer as if, yes, that is for sure the answer, when they don't really know. So this is absolutely critical. There are 3 key words that you need to be ready to say over and over again, probably during your interview, which is, I don't know, or similarly, I don't remember. Okay? It's okay to say you don't know. It's okay to say you don't remember. And in fact, the asylum officer will probably tell you this during your interview near the beginning, when they're kind of talking about the ground rules for the day and what's going to happen and giving you instructions about the interview. They'll tell you, if you don't know the answer to a question, just tell me you don't know, or that you don't remember. Most of them will say that. And it's important that you remember that, because you do not want to say something that isn't true or that you're not sure about. You don't want to give the impression that, well, you are sure, you do believe this, or it is a fact, when you don't really know. It's okay and important to say, I don't know, if you don't know. Definitely don't tell the asylum officer what you think they want to hear just because you think that they're expecting a certain answer, or that you need to say a certain answer. In certain cultures, that's kind of normal and accepted for people, or at least it happens a lot, to where people will tell someone that they view as being in a position of authority what they think that person wants to hear. And I saw this in the asylum office. I could just tell sometimes that people were telling me what they thought I wanted to hear as the asylum officer. Don't do that, okay? You've got to tell your story based on what actually happened to you, and if you don't know something that the officer is asking you about, you got to say you don't know or you don't remember. Now, along these lines, if you have an idea of the way in which you should be answering something, but you're not entirely sure, you can caveat. By that, I mean you can say things like, if it's about a date, you could say, well, I think it was around February of 2018, or it was about 2 years ago this happened. Using words like that that are like kind of, sort of, around, about, or I'm not positive, but I think it was around, or approximately, or as far as I can remember, or to the best of my recollection, that signals to the officer that you're not absolutely positive, and you give yourself some leeway, because then they won't be able to pin you down later and say, and use this against you as a so-called inconsistency in your testimony. So for example, if you said, yes, this event happened in February of 2020, but it turns out later that the officer confronts you with a document that you presented, like your personal statement that you presented with the case, where you said, oh, actually it was in March 2020. Well, at your interview, the officer is going to say, earlier you told me that it happened in February 2020, but your personal statement said it was March 2020. Can you explain this discrepancy? And that can hurt your case. But as where if you said in your interview, I'm not really positive, but I think it was around February 2020 or sometime around that time frame, but I'm not positive, then it's much more reasonable to the officer when they later see, okay, your personal statement said March, earlier you said it was around February, but you're not quite sure. That's close enough. They give you the benefit of the doubt if you phrase it in that way. And so here's a really important question. It's really important that you ask questions if you don't understand something, okay? Just tell the officer, oh, I have a question. If they say something that you don't understand, or you're not sure what they're getting at, ask them. Say, officer, I didn't understand that. Could you please repeat it? Or, officer, I didn't quite understand it. Could you please say that again, but in different words? you definitely don't want to just answer something when you're not sure exactly what the officer is asking about. Again, that's something that can lead to the officer thinking that there are inconsistencies in your testimony, because you may say something based on a misunderstanding of the officer's question. So don't just answer if you're not entirely sure what the officer is asking you. Okay, tell them to, or ask them to repeat, or tell them you don't understand, and ask a question about it. Okay. Moving on, number 4 in our list of 7 deadly asylum interview sins has to do with not keeping composure, or getting rattled and letting the questions and the process get to you such that you lose your composure. Now, you want to be sort of a stoic. You want to just be even keeled, not too passionate in your interview, not too high, not too low. You just want to be consistent throughout the whole interview emotionally, such that nothing can faze you. Okay, and that's hard to do because these interviews can be really intense. The officer is going to be asking you questions about difficult subjects, and sometimes they're going to be treating you in a hostile way. Not all officers are super professional. Some of them don't have very good bedside manners, and so what I'm saying is that some asylum officers they don't have that good of manners, and they can be impolite and aggressive. But you can't let this get to you, okay? You cannot let it upset you such that you're visibly upset, or such that you can't think straight. And that happens a lot because it's frustrating. Even if an officer does treat you well, it can still be very difficult because, as I said earlier, you're not in control of this interview. You might feel like you're not getting to say what you want to say because of the way the officer's handling it, and that's frustrating. And also, the officer is going to be constantly interrupting you and changing topics. And this can make it hard and make you very frustrated. But you can't let it get you too frustrated, because then you can't think clearly, and then you can't present yourself in a way that maximizes your chances for success. You won't be able to focus so well on the questions and on the answers that you need to be giving to express yourself. So just don't let them get to you. Try your best to not get flustered if things aren't going well, or if you're overcome with emotion or sad. You just got to try to just keep going and not let it affect you. And also, these are emotional interviews. As I said, you're talking about difficult things usually that have happened to you in your life, and it can be very emotional. And the officers are trained to interview people who have survived torture and other trauma, but they don't always do a good job of it. So you just have to be ready to do this for a few hours to talk about these very difficult things. It's true that sometimes this experience can re-traumatize someone, having to talk about very hard things, but it's a necessary part of this process. They can't give you asylum if they don't understand your case. It is a good idea to bring with you to your interview some tissues in case you become emotional and are crying, so that you can use them. Officers sometimes have them and will offer them to you, but not always. So bring in your purse or a handbag or a backpack, bring with you some tissues, and just remember and tell yourself it's okay. You'll get through this. It may be hard for a couple hours or a few hours, but the interview will end. You'll be okay. You'll get through it, and it's important that you do your very best to try to stay calm and to try to express yourself. And then this is very important. Remember this. You can always ask for a pause. You can always take a break. The officer will tell you this near the beginning of the interview. They'll say, anytime today, if you want to take a break, just let me know. And it's true. You really can just say, officer, can we take a break? Whether it's to go to the bathroom, or just if you're overcome with emotion and you're not thinking clearly, you're not able to do the interview as well as you would like, just ask for a short break, and the officer will give you a few minutes to step out into the waiting area where there should be a bathroom as well, so that you can take some time to collect yourself and to just kind of gather yourself so that you're ready to go back in and keep going. Don't be afraid to ask for a break. Moving on, 7 deadly asylum interview sins. The next one is dishonesty, okay? Not being honest. I saw this a lot when I was an asylum officer, and I can tell you this is the quickest way to get your case denied. And in addition to getting your case denied, you also can hurt the case of other people too, especially from your own country. If you lie and if you commit fraud in your asylum application, officers tend to look at applicants from the same country as kind of one collective whole, and your country can start to get a bad reputation because of fraud that people from your country commit. So you could be contributing to that for other people and making it less likely that other people will get asylum if you are not honest or if you lie and you commit fraud. Now, honesty is just the best policy, okay? And in life and in your asylum interview, it's just good to do the right thing, I believe. I firmly believe that you should not sacrifice your integrity for your asylum interview or anything else, and that you should do the right thing, which is telling the truth, being honest, being forthcoming. So be honest just because it's the right thing to do, but also strategically speaking, it's a good idea, okay? Because these officers that you're going to be dealing with, they're trained to spot fraud. They're trained to analyze what you're saying and the documents you submitted, to look for inconsistencies and to look for indicators that suggest you may be lying or something might not be right, okay? So when people lie, there's a pretty decent chance that they're going to get caught. Not everyone who lies gets caught, of course, but a lot of people do. And so just strategically speaking, if you're trying to maximize your chances for winning asylum, you don't want to lie. You don't want to misrepresent or to embellish things. Just tell the truth. Be 100% straightforward and honest and forthcoming. That's the best thing to do, okay? When an officer thinks that you've lied, even if they can't prove it, they're probably going to be a little bit hostile towards you. And they're going to be less inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt, okay? Because there are a lot of asylum cases where it's a close call and it could go either way. You take a set of facts and you apply them to the law, and the officer will think, you know what, I'm not entirely sure. This one could be a yes or it could be a no. And that's when these little things, some of which we've been talking about today, start to really matter, like the way that you present yourself and just the overall impression that the officer gets from you and your case. It matters in terms of giving you the benefit of the doubt and deciding a close case in your favor. And if the officer thinks that you're being disingenuous or not honest, but they can't really prove it in a way that they can use it against you to deny you formally, then they may start looking for other excuses to deny you, or they may just not give you the benefit of the doubt in a close case. So do be honest, okay? And this goes for everything that you do in your asylum case, from all of the documents that you submit as part of your application to any supplemental filing that you do after you've applied, and to everything that you say at your interview. You want to be honest and forthcoming. And by forthcoming, I mean, if the officer asks you a question, don't try to be clever and evade by giving some technically true answer that's actually misleading or is designed to try to hide something, okay? Giving a technically true answer when it is actually for the purpose of being evasive is the same as being disingenuous. And that's not a good idea. You don't want to do that in your asylum interview, okay? Next on the 7 deadly asylum interview sins list is losing focus. Asylum interviews are long and they're often very hard and they're very emotional, and it's easy to lose focus. In the world that we live in these days, it's easy to or it's tough to maintain your focus for more than a couple of minutes, right? Um, you know, whether it's scrolling through social media on your phone or flipping through channels, whatever the case may be, we have a hard time focusing on pretty much anything for more than a few seconds. You're asked during your asylum interview to stay present and to focus for hours at a time. And it takes all of your attention. You have to commit before you go into that interview to staying focused and mentally present the entire time. Now, it's easy at first. When you first get in the interview, you're fresh and you're up for it, and you're thinking hard about every question. You're thinking hard about everything you say. But as time goes on, it becomes increasingly easy to just sort of check out or to not think hard about what's going on and about the question and about your answer. But you can't do that. This interview is too important. Even if it takes several hours, and to be sure, I've seen interviews that have gone on for hours. I did an interview once when I was an asylum officer that was 8 hours, and that happens from time to time. Even in cases where it seems like it should be a pretty simple, straightforward case, there may be certain factors that the officer is aware of that make it take a lot longer. Or it may be the case that the asylum officer is not very experienced or not very good at their job, and so they're not able to be concise and focused, and they ask a bunch of questions that probably aren't that relevant, and so the interview takes forever. Whatever the case, it may take a long time, but even if it's just a couple of hours, it's still hard to really keep your energy up and to stay focused for 2 hours during an intense interview like this. And I've seen people sort of check out, like almost like they kind of gave up, after an hour or two and got too tired and became sort of disinterested, and like they were just going through the motions. Don't do that, okay? This is too important, and every question matters too much for you to just sort of check out and just kind of say something for the purpose of getting through the interview and making it end. And also, let me note that when I was an asylum officer, I noticed that people often made more mistakes later in their interview in terms of saying something that didn't seem to make sense or that seemed inconsistent with something they had said earlier. This happened often because the person was tired and worn down, and like they kind of checked out, kind of stopped trying to focus as hard as they could. So don't let your mind wander. Don't start thinking about other things, and also don't wonder about what you could have said instead. Don't second guess yourself. All you have to do or all you should do, is focus on one question at a time. You think carefully about what the officer is asking you with this question, and you think about how you need to answer for this question, and you give the answer. And then you do the next thing for the next question. You've got to keep your focus on this, and you don't want to be thinking about what you want to try to fit into the interview later. It's easy for people in any conversation to think more about what they want to say than it is to focus on what the other person is saying. And I've seen people do this in the asylum interview where it looks like they're just thinking about what they want to get out, what they want to express to me next, and they're not really focusing on my questions. And that's frustrating for the officer when you do that. You can't do that. Also, you can't get too caught up in things that have already happened in the interview. Maybe earlier, an officer asked you a question and you feel like you didn't give the best answer, or you were bothered by the question or bothered by your answer. You can't let that keep affecting you. You've got to move on. If you're dwelling on something that's already happened in the interview, you're not going to be able to focus as well on the question that's at hand right now. And you're not going to be able to focus as well on answering that question accurately and appropriately. So you got to focus on the question that is at hand right here and now, one question at a time. Also, there are things you can do to preserve your focus in an interview like this. So you've got to be proactive. Before the interview, you need to arrange to bring with you food and water, and you also need to take breaks, and you also need to prepare and practice for your interview beforehand. So I said earlier that some of these interviews can take hours. Well, if your interview starts in the morning at, say, 8 or 9 a.m. and goes for several hours, it may well go through lunchtime. And sometimes the officer will say, okay, well, we're going to take an hour for lunch. And so that may give you time to to leave the building and to go somewhere, to a restaurant nearby. If you drove, you can take your car or you can get a taxi or whatever. But they might not do that. They might say, we're going to take a 15-minute break, or we're just going to keep going. So you do not want to go through a several hours long interview without eating food and drinking water, because your energy will go down and it'll make it even harder to focus. So you need to bring with you to the asylum office food and water. Food, usually things like something that's very easy to open and to eat, that you don't have to do anything to prepare it, is best. So taking like an energy bar, like a granola bar, or a couple of them, or maybe an apple, a few things like that in your bag that you take with you, and eat them. And then even if it doesn't look like your interview, or there's no reason to believe your interview is going to take 5 hours, it's still a good idea to grab a snack and eat it even during like your first break after, say, 1 hour. It's a good idea to just eat something real quick, eat a little granola bar or something during a 5-minute break after about 1 hour, because you also don't know when the next break is going to come. Some officers will take regular breaks, like every hour of an interview they'll take a break, but not always. They might take a break after 1 hour, but then they might want to go for 3 hours straight after that, and not stop unless you ask them to stop. So again, don't hesitate to ask them to stop, but also take advantage of really every break you get. I would say to eat something, at least something small, like a granola bar. And for water, you need to take with you some kind of water bottle that has like a lid that screws tight, or else they probably won't let you take it in the building. They won't let you take just a cup full of water or soda or something like that into the building. So by being proactive and by preparing and bringing those things and then using them at your interview, and by doing the kinds of things that you're doing right now by watching this video, and by that I mean actually taking steps to prepare and practice beforehand, you're going to go into the interview with a lot more confidence and knowing what to expect, and that's going to make it easier for you to stay focused and to stay sharp and to listen and respond in the best way possible, to express yourself and tell your story so that you can give the officer the information that they need to give you asylum. All right, we've made it to the last one. This is number 7 on the list of the 7 deadly asylum interview sins. And this has to do with documents. Relying too much on documents. When I was an asylum officer, I could tell sometimes that the people thought, you know what? I don't have to tell you everything. I don't need to go out of my way to explain all this because it's already in my documents. It's already in the asylum application, Form I-589. I already said that. Or I explained all this in my personal statement. And in fact, sometimes when I was an asylum officer, people would say something like, yeah, like I said in my personal statement, or I explained it in my personal statement. You can look at that. No, that's not how this works. The officer expects you to tell your entire story or everything that's relevant to getting asylum at the interview. You cannot rely on something that's in your documents, your application, or your personal statement, or any evidence that you submitted with your materials, like perhaps letters from other people or country of origin information. You cannot rely on that to basically replace your testimony, which is the things that you're saying at your asylum interview. Okay, you need to get it on the record by actually talking about it at the interview. So you can't rely on the documents alone. And this is a saying in the asylum office that asylum officers interview people, not documents. And basically by that, what I mean is they're much more interested in what you have to say at your interview than they are on your documents. Okay, I've said many times that the things that you submit, the documents you submit as part of your case are important. And they're really important for setting the stage and giving the officer the information they need ahead of time to know what your case is about and to influence them, to predispose them to like you in your case. But it's still not as important as the interview. The interview matters more. What you say at your interview is the most important thing in your case, and they don't care that much, especially about evidence. Like if you submit things that purport to back up things that you're saying in your testimony that you've said in your personal statement, like official documents that show yes you were arrested or yes someone threatened you, those things are easily forged. Officers don't give them as much weight, just to be blunt, as they do your testimony, which means the things that you say at your asylum interview. And as I've said elsewhere in training, but it bears repeating here, you really don't need any documents to win. You can get asylum based just on your testimony if it's detailed, consistent, and plausible. Without any shred of documentary evidence, you can get asylum. So that just goes to show you that you really can't rely on your documents to win your case for you by themselves, and that you have to be ready to express yourself and explain what has happened and why you're afraid at your asylum interview. And I saw people that weren't ready to do this. They would say things like, yeah, it's, if you read my personal statement, you'll see in there, what my story is. Well, no, that doesn't work. Okay. That makes it sound like maybe someone else wrote your personal statement for you and you can't articulate now the things that are in there. And that's a fraud indicator. Even if that's not the case, even if there's not fraud and you did write your own personal statement, the officer might think that there's fraud if it's clear that you are just trying to rely on your documents to make your case for you, rather than being able and willing to do this at your asylum interview. So, there's a lot of things that can go wrong at asylum interviews, but these things that we've discussed today are 7 of the things that I saw over and over again as an asylum officer. And so I wanted to bring to your attention so that you can focus ahead of time on each of these things and preparing to address these issues so that they don't damage your case when it's time for your asylum interview. So thanks again for being with me on this training, and I'm excited to have you go through and be successful in your asylum interview. Thanks again.